Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick, and it's time to discuss the defense from that Week 2 win over the Browns. Joining me to do that is a man of greatly increased fame since last season. He's been on the UK Ravens pod for some time, but made a name for himself, and he's a face now we maybe remember because he announced the Ravens' fourth-round draft pick of Teddy Buchanan. James, how you doing? James Ogden.
I'm good, thanks, Ken. How are you?
Always great to talk football with you, James. So it's a better day already. Not to mention this Ravens game's got me in a good mood. Outstanding game from Roquan Smith. A whole lot of other things happened well, but the Ravens won with a suffocating defensive effort. So we have the fun of talking about that today, where the fun was definitely on the offensive side last week.
Absolutely, that's the thing. The defense just really had it was just a much better game all around from a lot of guys, and some promising stuff from some guys who sort of weren't as good last week.
Right, young players did well. I guess one of the things we probably need to hit on before anything else is Jair Alexander was deactivated for the game. I've got my own take on this, but let's hear yours first.
I just think that it's responsible from the Ravens. Like the Ravens, I think the thing that was overwhelmingly obvious from that first game was that this Ravens team is going to win a lot of regular season games. It's just really clear that is going to be the case. They obviously they struggled in certain areas against the truly elite QB, but for me, it's just clear that they're going to win a bunch of regular season games, and especially while if Lamar is healthy. So it just behooves them, I think, to consider the stretch run with guys like Jair Alexander. Like they need to be hitting their traps when it comes down to it towards the end of the regular season and into the playoffs into January. So it just feels prudent, I think, to manage him at this point and not push him too hard, I think.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, because I think if there's any question of health, and I think there always is with Alexander, you probably want to manage his snap count. And Awuzie seems to be playing pretty well through 2 games, so he's a guy that I'd be happy, basically alternating some snaps with Alexander with. So you have 2 guys who are typically well for about half a season. Let's get 1 season between the 2 of them out of them. Could be some games, obviously, where they're healthy together. But the thing with Alexander that I liked about this move a lot more than what they did last year is they didn't wait and sit on the decision that they did with Marcus Williams and Jackson. And I think the decision was more similar than people are willing to admit. Right now, everybody thinks, oh, it's just his health. He missed a bunch of camp, and they're making excuses for Alexander. I don't think it's all that, because Alexander, whenever he stepped on the field, he's been great, even the last 4 years when he's only played half the time. So that really hasn't been the problem before. Now, there's been more talk this year. He's supposed to be completely healthy, of course, because they always say that as soon as they sign him. Then he shows up for camp. He intercepted Jackson several times, and looked good finding the football. So things look like things were okay. You can't tell everything at camp, of course, and they have to lay off some elements. But we get into the regular season, did not play well in that first game, and it wasn't just slowness, health issues. It looked like some other judgment things too, particularly losing the one receiver. I don't remember if it was Coleman or somebody else that he lost a little further up the left sideline when he peeked into the background. He peeked into the backfield. But it was plays like that kind of bothered me about Alexander's play that was not good. And I think Harbaugh is really being careful with his words right now, and is basically telling us that it's not just his health, it's getting him back into football shape, which what he really means by that is getting him ready to play football again.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? Right? It's the whole thing that goes into it. It's not just the injury has caused that to be the issue, right? He hasn't played enough during the preseason, during camp. So I think it just does make sense to get him ready. And the thing is, he's in a, as you mentioned, Awuzie has played well through 2 games. Like he's in a competition here. Like if he's not Jair Alexander, then he is in a battle with Awuzie and possibly even CJ Tampa, who I thought was promising in the preseason, had a better game this week, albeit on very limited snaps. But there is something there outside corner for the Ravens. So it's not like he's going to just walk onto the starting lineup. So it just does make sense to make this decision at this point, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you entirely. The Ravens overcame a lot of things in this game. I thought it was really an exceptional game from that standpoint. They had the lowest rushing total of the Lamar Jackson era. Any game started by Lamar Jackson, there's never been fewer than 61 yards ever before. They had 45 in this game. They overcame, I thought, a what looks to be a very promising and in the future dangerous Cleveland team. I was especially impressed by Harold Fannin, but a lot of their young guys. Graham I thought, played pretty well. I thought Schwessinger played pretty well. Generally looks like a pretty dangerous team. Devin Bush had never put it together in his years in Pittsburgh, but he now looks like he's playing some real football.
Yeah, and is it Malik Collins was a wrecking ball. I mean, obviously you're going to talk about that in the offense show, but he was a wrecking ball all night, and just they do look, they are a force to be reckoned with on defense. And the thing that you saw, I think, from on the offensive side of the ball against the Ravens defense here, you're right to point out Fannin, who I loved in the draft, and I love that pick for them, especially as it started to look like Fannin and Njoku. I mean, Fannin still, he's got a lot of work to do on his blocking, but Fannin and Njoku in that sort of dual tight end role, it started to look much more like a Stefanski, like a really good Stefanski offense than it's looked like in previous years. The only thing I'd say is they're going to have a problem on the offensive line at the end of this year, as they have some contracts up for renewal on that. The big guys, I can't remember which ones are up, but the Batonio, Pochik, and Teller sort of axis in the middle there. I think it gets broken up after this year, so they're going to have to find a way to keep some of those guys, because they were quite impressive in this game, I thought, in patches and sort of fits and starts.
Yeah. I thought the guy who kept showing up as being bowled right back into the cone was Teller, like play after play. But some of that was the way the Ravens schemed it. They most of the time they had Pochik and Pochik. I think I've always called him Posick, but if it's Pochik, that's fine too. And the left guard Batonio were double teaming Jones, and that really limited scheme wise what the Browns could do. It looked to me like the Browns committed to that, which is the smart move, because it's an I dare you not to double me situation with Travis Jones. But then that left a couple of plays where the left tackle Leviston had to make a choice to block Starks inside and leave Owe with a free run. I mean, multiple things happened on that left side where they probably gave away schematically with that one play exactly what they were trying to do.
Yeah, and there were plays where they then also committed, obviously from a Giro perspective, when they were running Giro, they committed Teller and Lucas to blocking Madubuike, and would at times leave Njoku with Tavius Robinson, and they definitely felt like they had to scheme for our interior, and I thought they did a reasonably good job of limiting. Like it's a good interior defensive line right now, and I felt like they did a pretty good job in terms of attacking the Ravens from that perspective. It's just they're just a little at the moment. I think the problem is that running game is just not where it's going to be in a few weeks. They're just, Judkins is not up to speed yet, and he's not making, he's you can tell he's not in football shape from some of the I'm a really big Judkins fan. I was a big fan of his coming out of the draft, and I thought I loved that pick from them. But he's not Quinshon Judkins right now, obviously, because he's had a week's worth of practice.
Definitely a talent. They also have Sampson, who's been a great receiver, looked like a pretty lousy pass blocker in this game a couple times against Roquan Smith, but certainly a great core of young players. Dylan Gabriel came on and looked pretty damn good on the final drive, even though Ravens obviously are playing him very soft at that point. They get after Flacco all the day, and I can just imagine being Flacco on the sideline watching that final drive, and I'd go, "Yeah, now you call off the dogs, for this game." Yeah, so. Talk about some of the other things though the Ravens overcame in this game. They had their own inability to put away close games. They really had to stare down as the late in the third quarter. they drove for the drive to go back up 17. They might have finished in the fourth quarter even. I think it might have. But anyway, the one that put them back up 27-10, and they still had 2 scores left of the fourth. So I think they scored 3 times. They overcame a huge loss in snap count for the second straight week. I'm actually very concerned about that. This team needs to be able to sustain drives. And I think it's a big part of the Ravens' identity is being able to outsnap your opponent frequently by exactly the sort of margins they were been outsnapped by the first 2 weeks. 78-50 by Buffalo and then 72-53 by Cleveland here. You're going to more often than not lose that game.
Yeah, and there's a little bit, isn't there, that the way they I'd be interested to see what the snap count was at the third quarter in the first game, because it felt like they were doing a better job of it through 3 quarters, and obviously then it went off the rails in the fourth.
At halftime, it was the first game. It was 20. I think it was 28-28, and it was 50-22 in the second half. So that's probably the split you're looking for.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? And I totally agree with you that I do think they need to, that it is part of their MO. Like that is how this team is going to win, and so they are going to have to sort of address that in terms of sustaining drives. It was great in this game. I mean, this game was a feature of looking at the Ravens defense and to an extent special teams, but more the defense, bailing out the offense here with short fields constantly, and it just felt like this was a really good like performance from the Ravens defense, and shows a way in which the Ravens can win with defense when they need to.
Yeah, and we've obviously seen him score enough points that we know they can win with offense, and we've seen him do that in the past. But we hadn't had a performance like the last 8 games of last year, 9 games, I guess, including the playoffs to date this year. So it's nice to see them come back with a game like that. They scored 41 points. He had like 3 plays of 20+ yards. Again, this will be in the offensive show, but this is just a lot to overcome. Like the fact that Harbaugh got him prepared again for this game. I know that Harbaugh's got a lot of haters right now. Anytime the Ravens lose 1 in a row, it's time to fire Harbaugh here in Baltimore. But they're 26-0 now when Harbaugh is favored by 11+. Those are not gimmies. A lot of the great coaches of all times have had 3 to 9 losses in such situations. Don Shula had, I think it was 72-9, and anybody should lose about 10 or 11% of the games, even under the most favorable circumstances in the NFL. And that hasn't happened to Harbaugh as of yet. All right. Let's talk a little bit, and let me get back to my notes here. I'm sorry, I'm a little out of sorts here. But let's talk a little bit maybe about some of the scheme issues so far. And let's see. They allowed 7 rushing first downs, high for the Ravens. The Browns converted 7 of 18. On third down, they also had 1 of 3 on fourth down. It was that awful tipped pass again. What were you feeling when that ball floats into the hands of Tillman? Here it goes again. I mean,
it's just ridiculous, wasn't it? It was just like how on it. It was the freakiest of freak plays. Like it was not. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I was worried then.
At the heart of it was a very bad play by Humphrey to not collect the ball. Some say to not knock it down. I don't have any problem actually with him trying to collect the football, but it was fourth down. If he knocks the ball down, he's probably going out of bounds right there based on the way he's headed to the sideline. He's not getting the Ravens would be starting at the 2 instead of the wherever they were, 18 or something. But it was it was just a very bad play.
Yeah, all around.
No defensive penalties in this game. Now, they did have 2 on loop, and they had 4 on the offense. So it stalled some drives, and it fueled some of their offensive inefficiency. But they did a good job of avoiding defensive flags. And defensive flags have been something that have really dogged this team, particularly some of the personal fouls, some of the roughing the passer stuff, and in particular last year. To go through a game without one, that really helped, make this defensive effort, I thought, what it was.
There were a couple of instances where they got through onto Flacco, and it was a very different story. Like it felt like it was a bit of a point of I felt like it was a bit of a point of emphasis. There were occasions when they got to Flacco, and in previous games and iterations of this defense, they would have run through him and not worried about it. But there were times when they visibly stopped themselves from making hits on him and sort of tried to. Yeah, it seemed like a point of emphasis, certainly on the quarterback anyway.
Yeah, they did get a number of quarterback hits in the game. A couple by Oweh. Who else had a quarterback hit in this game? Matabike had one. Green had one. Green kind of had him by the legs. Was kind of pulling him down at the time. And, of course, they had the sacks.
There was one specific one from Oweh where it did feel like he sort of, and it might have just been circumstance, but it did feel like he sort of held up and just didn't stopped himself from going too vociferously.
Yeah, I'm with you right now because I think it was his very first one in the game. He had two later where he did kind of play through make the continuation play, as they would call it in basketball, 30 years ago when I knew about that. But now it's in that first play by Oweh, I thought he did hold up. I think you're right. And I was looking at the film and slowing it down and looking at how he was beating the guy and taking notes and whatnot. And I thought there's no way Flacco's not going down on that. They must have missed it in the game book and they hadn't done it. It's good. All right. The inside linebacker situation is an interesting one. I bring this up because you actually made the Teddy Buchanan draft pick, called it out, from which is an amount of notoriety that I will always be jealous of in some way. I got to tell you, James, that's just very cool to announce an NFL draft pick. But Teddy Buchanan now appears to be getting a bigger shot at playing time than Trenton Simpson. Somebody had mentioned something today that I want to get your thoughts on. But Buchanan started the game. Simpson only played really one series in each half. But I thought for this game that Simpson really outplayed Buchanan pretty significantly in his limited number of snaps.
Well, this was the thing, right? It does feel like, and I felt through the preseason. So it was a strange one with the Buchanan pick because I actually loved the pick as well as making the pick, which I was a little bit worried about when I was told I was going to be making the announcement that I might end up with a guy that I really didn't like. I was not the sort of equivalent pick from the year ago as Tez Walker, and I was not high on the Tez Walker pick at all. So I was a little bit concerned about that. And Teddy, so I really liked him. I really liked the story at UC Davis and then to Cal, and I felt like he fit the Ravens really well in the things that he did at Cal. The thing I would say is I did not think he would translate. I did not think they would have him on the field early. Mm-hmm. The thing that he struggles with right now is he doesn't take on blocks particularly well, and he's there were times in this game, we might get to general thoughts about him at some point later on, but there were certainly individual points in this game where I thought that showed up, and his play. He shows enough sign right now for me to think he is going to be a good linebacker in the league when he's able to win how he wins, which is with his processing and with his instincts and with his athleticism. But that takes a while at the linebacker position to come to fruition. It's not something that you hit the ground running with, and he's doing a pretty good job right now. But at the moment, Trenton Simpson in the preseason and then in this game looks like the more experienced linebacker. He looks like the game is slower for him right now. And also he's far better at taking on blocks at the point of attack, taking on offensive linemen and getting off blocks and making plays. And obviously he was significantly outsnapped by Buchanan in this game. So that, and obviously this is now the second year running where this has happened, where Trenton Simpson is like, obviously I think he looks better this year than he looked last year, but he looked serviceable in lots of ways last year. So there is definitely something going into this, and I don't know what it is. My only hypothesis from this game, and it's a weak hypothesis because there's not really that much behind it, not really that much evidence of it, but Roquan Smith had a really good game in this game, and Roquan Smith was better down the stretch when Trenton Simpson wasn't next to him last year. Now there were other factors probably that played into Roquan Smith being better down the stretches, not just that, but is there something in that where Roquan Smith does not feel comfortable next to Trenton Simpson? I don't know. That's me. Wild speculation and not really sure, but there is definitely something there. And as you mentioned, it is an interesting thing to watch.
I think that's a good point. I think there might be something there because it may not be anything to do with Smith necessarily feeling more comfortable. It might be that Orr is more comfortable using Buchanan in some coverage responsibilities and letting Roquan Smith go over to the passer. Roquan Smith triggered downhill in this game like I've never seen him. I mean, he's in the backfield. He had quarterback hits. He's scooping the fumble. I mean, that I guess he could have done from level 2 anyway. But a lot of the plays he made in the backfield are plays, if he is really watching his coverage responsibility, he can't make easily. And he had good plays in coverage too. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he was a good player all the way around. But I thought Buchanan, if you're going to pick the thing I liked best about his game, is he's ahead of the curve, I would say, in terms of where he needs to be as a coverage linebacker, in terms of knowing where his assignment is and kind of seeming to understand what's going on behind him. And that's very hard to learn for young linebackers. The stuff going on between level 2 and level 3, where he's kind of reading the quarterback, figuring out how he needs to deny the lane. That was impressive. I would think he was a lot less impressive as a run defender in this game. That he didn't really tackle well. I noticed PFF had him for 0 missed tackles. I think I've got him for either 1 or 2. I have to go back through my notes. I didn't scour it before this show, but he definitely had 1 that was picked up very quickly. This run through, I would say it was just off left tackle was the run, and got into level 2. He slipped off the tackle. 2 other guys made it. And the 2 other guys were credited with the tackle. Buchanan's not credited, but Buchanan was on that tackle to start with. And it's got to be a missed tackle for him, I would think, in that notion. But it was about 6 yards, maybe up the field that happened.
I agree with you. His instincts in coverage right now are good and not good. They are ahead of the curve, as you mentioned, for where he should be in his second game as a pro. I think, I'm a guy who obviously does a lot of draft analysis and watches a lot of players leading up into the draft, and so I'm interested in how they're developing at this point in their career. And what I see from Teddy Buchanan is actually some development in his game as a run defender. He in this game, there was a point at which he took on a puller. He took on Wyatt Teller at one point. Wyatt Teller absolutely pancaked the life out of him, but he at least was aggressive and met him at the line of scrimmage and didn't give ground. He was flattened, but he didn't give any ground, and allowed Roquan Smith to make the play in behind him. And there were times when he was queuing behind Roquan Smith to make a play. So, and I started to see some technique from him as well in terms of his hands and taking on blocks. So there's some improvement going on there. He is not a good run defender right now. That's unarguable. But I do think in coverage he is doing a solid job right now as that will linebacker, and that clearly is what's keeping him on the field. But as you mentioned up top, I'm not sure. Trenton Simpson I felt was pretty solid in coverage in this game too. So it is a strange one. They clearly see something that they don't like.
There's something else strategically they're going to have to work out, and that is, I think Buchanan is the backup at least at both Mike and Will spots. So if that's the case, he needs live fire to get ready to take over the Mike role if that's needed. Whereas Simpson, that'll never be his role. At least I don't believe so.
No, and Buchanan will survive better, I think, in the Mike role with his play style. Like in the Mike role, if his instincts get to the point where I think they're going to get to, his processing, I think, is very good. And if he gets to the level, once the game starts to slow down for him at the position, he gets to the level that he can get to in terms of his processing of the game at the NFL level. I think you can see him survive without elite block taking, block shedding ability. Like there are plenty of linebackers who thrive in the NFL in that style. So it will help him once he gets there. So maybe they just feel that where the trajectory is for the players right now, it's better for them to have Buchanan on the field taking the live fire, as you mentioned, and Simpson is I think it's a contract year, right, for Trenton Simpson?
No, he's got one more year under contract, but it's still right. Year 3 versus year 1, and if you had to really try and not promote the value, that's not what I want to do. I want to provide the most runway to a player you think might be better. Then you want to provide it to the year 1 guy. I mean, you always have that as a goal relative to your older guys. So the Ravens have made that choice at a couple of positions, but most notably this at the cutdown day, they cut JAD and they kept Martin. I mean, it's certainly not for current value. It's a future value, thing only. So I'm not saying it's the wrong move either, but it was a bitter pill to swallow with some of the other guys who made the roster. All right, what else are we going to talk about? I think let's move over to the defensive line now. Oh, no, actually, one more thing I want to say about the will linebacker spot. The Ravens have not entirely committed to dime or no dime. They played a lot less dime than they did in the first week against the Bills. They had it on, I want to say 25 times, 25 snaps of dime for 252 or something. They gave up 10 yards per play and change with the dime. But this week, they only played it 5 times with outstanding results. So they had 4 drive-ending plays and a 5th play, which was a defensive win. They specifically gave up 4 yards on 3rd and 7 on that play that got reversed, and then they threw the touchdown on the next play. So they had 5 defensive wins out of 5 with the dime. I think that's going to mean the dime stays, but I do kind of wonder if they're going to go back to a 3 safety dime instead of this 4 corner dime, where you're not really playing a second linebacker type. You're putting an extra corner on the field who probably would not be as effective against, say, a running back or a tight end.
Yeah, I want to touch on this later. You did wonder in this game with Lowry being up whether they would use 3 safeties and release Hamilton a little bit more and get him doing things more around the line of scrimmage, and they didn't really do that. So it definitely was that. I do think that's something they'll probably keep in their back pocket and will probably use a bit more at some point down the line.
Yeah, that was to me that was an enormous thing. I thought it was a tell as well. I thought Lowry's active. They're taking Lowry over Alexander. They're probably going to want to find ways in which they don't have to use their cornerbacks. And it would have made all kinds of sense in this game, particularly against Cleveland, where Hamilton's had a lot of success in the past. Thinking back to the Deshaun Watson, float up the line of scrimmage, getting the passing lane, tip it to himself like a basketball player, and take it in the end zone. This would have been a great game against their 12 personnel to get Hamilton more involved. And if you're looking for what was the real spark in the Cleveland offense, their run game wasn't bad. They ran for 5 yards a carry in this game, so it's not like they failed. A lot of it was late with that 31-yard run by Judkins. Where they succeeded pretty much throughout the game was in throwing to the tight ends. Fannin had a big game, and you mentioned Fannon's blocking not really being up to snuff. That was some place where I really noticed him. He showed up on 3 different run plays, making a block he's got no right to make. One of them was on Tavius Robinson on a seal, and another one is on Matt Abike. I mean, that's not supposed to happen. So I thought he's very impressive.
Yeah, he definitely can. There is definitely potential there with his blocking. I just feel from the college games, and I did see a little bit in this game that just the high level of inconsistency with his blocking. That's just a thing that you live with right now with Fannin. But you could see his game would translate immediately, especially into the Cleveland offense. And so it's not a surprise to me that he's become a part of a reasonably big part of the offense quickly. And yeah, they definitely had success with that. And that was, I think, the success you mentioned with the running game was what sort of drove my comment before about how well at times the interior of the offensive line for the Bills played, because the Browns played, because they did run the ball with some success against this Ravens front, which doesn't usually allow that type of success, I would say. I thought the interesting thing as well with the tight ends was they played a lot. The Ravens played a lot of middle of the field close coverage in this game. Malachi Starks was moved back into the deep post consistently, and so it does tend to suggest. I think that was the kind of the Browns did a very good job of still being able to get the ball to their tight ends, which is clearly what they want to do in this offense. Despite that, and I think the Ravens were doing that pretty much too. They're not overly scared of Joe Flacco, so they're not necessarily going to play too high all the time, especially in the same amount that they did against Josh Allen. But it was definitely a ploy to try and negate some of the potential with the tight ends, and the Browns still did a pretty good job of getting the ball to them.
The 2 things they more or less thumbed their nose at in this game, I thought, one was they didn't play any base package, not a single freaking snap the entire game. Now, this is a team that throws out 12 personnel all the time. One of the common responses to 12 is to throw the base defense out there. You don't have to do it every time, but if they're doing 21, you pretty much do have to use base. If they're throwing 12, they use a lot of tight end in the backfield. So you're basically saying, I don't respect your run game at all. We'll go without a third lineman, and we'll stay with our with our nickel package and go lighter. And the Ravens, it wasn't even a big nickel, it was standard 3-corner nickel. They didn't use any big nickel in this game either. They didn't use any jumbo nickel to try and take a linebacker off the field and get an extra defensive lineman. They had one snap of jumbo the entire game, that came on a 3rd and 1 play where they put in 4 heavies to try and stop a sneak. But otherwise, they didn't do a darn thing. They did not do a darn thing. They just said, we don't believe you can beat us. And the other one, of course, is what you mentioned at all, that they kind of had released Hamilton to be closer to the line of scrimmage, which is that'll help you in the run game too. Not that he was there all the time, but he triggered very well from deeper to get downhill, and did a very good job in the game of helping where needed. Hamilton had his usual great game in this one, I thought, and he's a reason why you can take some chances in terms of not having the extra lineman on the field.
He like this game in the, with, I was mentioning about Malachi Starks going back into the deep post, it did allow Hamilton to get a bit closer to the line of scrimmage. We're not talking about him playing that role that he played in 2 years ago, where he's roaming around the line of scrimmage and making plays, but he was closer, and he's a phenomenal player. And
you ever have one of those days where everything's off? Well, Mood can help with that. And let me tell you about Mood. It's the online cannabis brand that is changing the way we handle everything, from stress to sleepless nights, with functional gummies that are 100% federally legal cannabis. Mood launched to make cannabis affordable, accessible, and transparent, while at the same time supporting American farmers growing premium hemp on small pesticide-free farms. Their gummies are next level. Seriously, I've tried a few, and each one feels totally different. The Sleepy Time gummies, out like a light, immediately asleep. The Epic Euphoria, it's perfect when you just need a reset to feel good again. What makes them unique? Mood combines THC with herbs and adaptogens, so you get real targeted effects. You're not going to find this in your typical dispensary. And here's the best part. Mood ships discreetly to most states, offers a 100-day satisfaction guarantee, and right now you get 20% off your first order with the promo code RAVEN. Just head to mood.com. Find your perfect gummy and use the code RAVENS at checkout to save 20%.
He just consistently puts week in, week out, shows you why the Ravens paid the kind of money that they paid to him, because he even from that depth is able to make plays. The Browns didn't even bother trying many screens in this game, because he's just an absolute mass murderer of screens. You can't run anything against him. And there was one early on that they tried, and Hamilton did exactly what he does, which is he just diagnoses it ridiculously quickly, and then has the explosion over the first 5 to 10 yards of his run that just negate it. They had it, when you look at it, they had it well, but that play well blocked up. Like, if Hamilton doesn't do what he does, that's quite a big gain that they get. They had 3 offensive linemen out. They caught the Ravens with I think it was Teddy Buchanan coming on the blitz. So they caught the Ravens in probably a pretty good defensive play call for that play to work. And Hamilton just accounts for it. No one can make that block. No offensive lineman can make that block on Kyle Hamilton. And he's such a great player to watch it. He's one of those players that, as a lover of the sport, you just love to just watch. He's a guy that you just week in, week out look forward to watching play.
This was not a good week to be a Browns running back with those screens and swings going out there. And those weren't the only ones, but those guys, they were set up to take a big hit play after play after play. Flacco had a few times where he had to lob the ball over pass rushers, once at Wouzier on the left side, once Hamilton on the right side, trying to get the ball to a receiver. That takes extra time, guess what? And that extra time means big hit instead of not. And frankly, in terms of TFLs in this game, it would have looked a lot worse for the Browns and better for the Ravens if they caught those balls. But they dropped, and it looks like maybe intentionally a couple times, but not intentionally a couple more times that maybe were fear related. Some balls that they were going to take a huge hit for not a first down on those plays.
Yeah, I wanted to mention before as well, when you talked about the sort of lack of respect to the running game, I think, and this sort of shows out in that realm as well. Like the Ravens, I think they just made a calculation right. I think this is probably going to be different when the Browns when the Ravens go to Cleveland later in the season, because I think by that point you're going to see a very different Quinshon Judkins and a different running game because of that. I think they made a calculation in this game that Judkins probably was going to be on a snap count and also wasn't going to be up to speed, and so couldn't hurt them too much. Jerome Ford is fine, but is not gonna hurt you greatly. And Sampson, as much of a fan as I was of his out of Tennessee, he's not necessarily a guy who in his second game in the NFL is really going to gash you. So I felt like they probably made a calculation there of like, let's not respect that too much, because there just isn't that much in the backfield right now for the Browns.
Well, I mean, it's really hard to say, I think, who the Browns will be in week 11 of this year when the Ravens play them next. I think it's probably less than an even money bet that Joe Flacco will still be at quarterback, maybe a lot less than an even money bet. So they'll be trying to figure out what they have with Gabriel. They might even be at a point where they're trying to figure out what they have with Sanders, as unlikely as that seems right now. Now, the Browns guy I have on the show, Jake Burns, who's outstanding. I don't know if you follow his work at all, but yeah, he does a great job, and he really believes that neither of these guys is the guy. So possibly they'll both be gone, not necessarily by next year, but that he expects the Browns to take their quarterback next year with all the draft capital they've stockpiled, because they now probably have the draft capital to get up to the number 1 overall pick if they want to trade 2 for 1, or maybe 2 for 1 and change, but 2 for 1 to get it done. They should have a couple of top 10 picks. Browns actually this year may be reducing their chance to get their quarterback by playing pretty well. And I think that's another reason why the Browns may decide, hey, let's take a look at these other guys first, because we really don't want to end up here with a 7-10 season when we could be 4-13.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see. Let's not don't get me onto the draft too much, because we'll go for 3 hours. But there are some interesting options in this year's class. I do think they will have a chance at wherever they are in the first round with the capital they have. They will have a chance at picking a quarterback of a higher caliber than Dylan Gabriel or Shadir Sanders. So it is an interesting class from that perspective. So it does make sense that they'd be waiting on that, I think.
Is the problem similar to what I'll call the old Ravens and wide receivers after round 1, that they could never get one because they don't know how to develop one, which was certainly seemed to be the case with Baker Mayfield. I mean, they had a chance at the top quarterback in the draft. They didn't take Lamar Jackson, and there were other guys though. Josh Allen was available. Baker Mayfield was perfectly good. It seems like after 7-8 years in the league, whatever it's been, seems to be okay. I mean, is the problem with the Browns anyway?
Yes, probably right. but I think they'll have a shot, especially they will have a shot anywhere in the first round, I think, to take an intriguing name this time, like an intriguing prospect this time around. This class is not like the last one where it's one and then you're really searching, and guys who might be a first round pick actually end up being a 4th round pick. Like there are a few first round options in this class, and if they can get it right and develop a guy, but there's some big ifs, as you mentioned.
All right, Arch Manning, is he in this year's draft or next year's draft?
Depends on whether he comes out or not. So he could do. There's been some rumors about the fact that he'll go back to school for a second year, because this is his first year of starting. So he could be in this class, but there's rumors that he won't necessarily be in this class. But there's a lot of other options that are intriguing, and you can go in so many different ways. There's a definite kind of what's your flavor type to this quarterback class, and there's a few guys that won't necessarily be first round picks who I think will be interesting too. So it's a good class from that perspective, I feel, and it might shake out to not being the type of class that it might not shake out to being the Baker Mayfield type class, but I think it will be a good class this year.
All right. One thing I wanted to talk to you about before we go into the packages and the pass rush and other things is the defensive line roles, because this Ravens team, I think, had a lot of clarity added in this game. I thought we got some clarity in the first game, in large part because I thought Aeneas Peebles had kind of flashed in a small number of snaps against Buffalo. Played a lot more in this game, 30% of the snaps, and he's played now 22% for the year. I think he's played quite well, both as a pass rusher and a couple times in run defense as well, which was not entirely expected. But he had one really nice play in the final drive, the second play of the last drive. Swam right by Teller, who looked his age, and got in the backfield. I think it was Judkins, but it might have been Sampson, but I think it was Judkins. And he couldn't decide which way to go quickly, and then before he knew it, it was over, and he's on the ground for no gain. But a good play by Peebles there, and he's looked very good rushing the passer. Looked explosive. I'll ask you. I'll make it a question. In terms of role for Peebles, where do you expect to see him getting most of his playing time this year?
I really like the Peebles pick because the Ravens in recent years, if you roll the clock back sort of 5-6 years to before Anthony Weaver started setting the defensive front, and obviously I know Anthony Weaver's not here anymore, but when he started setting the defensive front, you started to see the Ravens start to thrive with different types of defensive linemen. There are times in the past where they've taken a defensive lineman that doesn't quite fit their two-gapping style, doesn't quite have the technique down that they need. For years, they only took guys who proved that they could two-gap in college. And then they took some flyers on guys like Timmy Jernigan, who were never going to fit that type of that mold, and it didn't work. And then in recent years, like I said, since Anthony Weaver started setting the front a few years ago, and since he's left, it has continued on. They are able to take these types of player like Peebles and fit them into their defensive line, fit them into their structure, and put them in a position to succeed. And that's what we're starting to see with Peebles immediately is they are not asking him to do too much to gapping. They're not asking him to do the things that he's never going to be able to do. They're asking him to do things like he did on that play where he's able to penetrate and he can get in the backfield and make a play. And so I don't necessarily see his snap count rising above what it was this week. I think for the whole of the season, really, I think this is his role. And it's great that he's hit this role this early. I did not expect him to hit this role in week 2. So it's really promising that he is in this role already. The one thing I'd say is the Ravens need to be a little bit careful of him being sort of, he sort of reached a little bit of kind of like in the rotation in this game. And so then there were a couple of snaps, and it's not happening very often, so it's fine. But there were a couple of snaps where they ended up with him, Broderick Washington, who had a bit of who is up and down a little bit. And this wasn't Washington's best game. They had him, Broderick Washington, and Teddy Buchanan taking on Teller, Batonio, and Posick, and it did not go well. So that is the bit that they need to make sure that they minimize, and they minimized it in this game. It was only 1 or 2 snaps, but I just don't want to see that too often, basically.
Okay. I think they're specifically trying to avoid those situations on any obvious running situations, and how they've been able to work it so far is by game script. And this is where I think Peebles has a role that's going to be very specific with this team. Get up by 2 scores and go ahead and let Peebles go crazy, go after the quarterback. He's an undersized 3, but one of the problems is that his main use as a player is very similar and very overlapping with what Nnamdi Madubuike does. So if you're going to have him in there, the same snaps you'd want Nnamdi Madubuike for, and Nnamdi Madubuike is a package deal with Travis Jones, as we've seen now. They play 42 out of 43 snaps together in this game. And they're going to be on the field in obvious passing situations. But there's a second kind of obvious passing situation. There's end of half, and there's other game script related ones. And that seems to be the big use for Peebles. So if I look at our charts of when he played, he didn't play much at all in the first half. He only played 6 snaps in the first 2 quarters. But then he played 2 more snaps in quarter 3, which still wasn't much. He had 8 till that point. In quarter 4, he had 14 snaps. So he's on the field when the Ravens build that big lead and can afford to have a pure pass rusher out there. They were able to use Washington in this game to rotate through some roles that are not really his. So Washington is kind of a disadvantaged 3 tech because he doesn't take advantage of a guard in the same way. He's really more, you want him in the 5 tech situation where you really need the additional beef, and he can give you some value there in terms of denying space. I like that, but they also used Washington as a 1 in this game when they had Peebles in the game, and they weren't afraid to do it. They put the 2 of them in there and got after the quarterback as best they could. It wasn't perfect, and I'd agree. Having Buchanan in a triangle with those 2 is not an ideal situation in terms of what you've got. But I do like that they have a plan for Peebles. And Peebles, if he can be used in this plan to the sort of degree that the Ravens have had 2-score leads in the past, he is going to be a remarkable asset because the guy has all the athleticism you would want in that 1-gap penetrating 3 tech.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
All right. The other guy, now John Jenkins' role seems to be a little bit clearer too. And John Jenkins came to the Ravens from that Raiders team after setting his career high in snaps 2 years in a row. So he's played the most he ever has at age, whatever it was, 33 and 34, 34 and 35. He might be 35 still right now, 30, 36 this season. I'm not exactly sure, but I'll tell you this. Jenkins played a fair amount early in this game, and then he really stopped playing after the second play of the second drive in quarter two. He only played 6 more snaps the entire rest of the game. He's losing snaps as the backup nose to Washington, which means Peebles is going in with Washington. Remember, Madubuike and Jones didn't do anything but play together. So that was the pairing. It was Washington and Jenkins playing together, and then it became Washington and Peebles playing together. And I do say, I think the Ravens, Orr is adjusting well to how he wants that pass rush to work, to have that choice be based on game script. And John Jenkins is not a terrible pass rusher last year or this year in the preseason.
No, he wasn't, and it was interesting, wasn't it? And it, like I said, I will feel a little if that becomes the situation, and we end up in this situation where like the second half is what it looks like. Well, to be honest, the second quarter, I don't mind if they've got a lead and they're playing with Peebles and Washington. That's okay. In the second quarter, there was a couple of snaps where it was a bit, and because obviously, as you mentioned, Jenkins sort of stopped playing as much in the second quarter. I would be concerned if that is the rotation that they're going to have to play with. I'd like to see Jenkins continue to play a good number of snaps. I'd like to see a bigger guy playing there, because I just think teams like the Browns, with running schemes like the Browns, with interior offensive line like the Browns have, that is going to be an issue, I think, down the stretch with some teams. So I'd like to see not more of a role, but I'd like to see Jenkins playing his fair share of snaps for the whole game. And so it'd be interesting to see why that happened from the Ravens.
Yeah, I mean, he played the last 2 snaps of the game, so it wasn't like he was hurt or something. No. So it wasn't anything like that. It was a matter of pure choice. Yeah. I like it from the sense of getting people the live fire for starters. The really experimental, the laboratory component of it is playing Washington at the nose, because you could also go with Jenkins at the nose. You just wouldn't necessarily get I don't know if you'd be more or less likely to get the double team. Let's put it that way on Jenkins as opposed to Washington. But neither of them seem like a guy you absolutely have to double.
No, and the thing is, like Peebles, I think it's funny, isn't it? Because when Madubuike first started, he was not as light as Peebles, but was relatively raw as a run defender. They put him in situations where as they do him with Peebles, they put him in situations where he could work. But they do still have this kind of, it's like a change-up program. They do have this run defense program for their defensive linemen that does seem to start to get the best out of them. But Madubuike in this game, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, there were instances where he was inconsistent against the run, but then there were instances where he did things that you just never saw from him in year 1, year 2, and it has got better over the recent years. But he uses his power much more effectively against double teams now than he did in previous seasons. So there's a blueprint there for what Peebles could become to make it a bit easier on his running partner than it is right now on Washington.
Yeah, I'll buy that. And I think we need to speak specifically to the way in which Madubuike and Jones are like a symphony working together right now. The way I'm seeing it, the committed double teams on Travis Jones are doing wonders across the line. We just mentioned that briefly before, but I mean, Madubuike got a lot of one-on-one matchups for Teller, and Teller was not up to the task. I saw PFF had him with like a 67 pass blocking grade or something. I'm like, they're watching a different game. He gave up pressure after pressure, got walked straight back into the pocket. And it's the kind of interior pressure you can't afford to give up. He gave it up on stunts. He gave it up on a lot of just straight one-on wins where Madubuike is just using his power to drive him back. He's not even making, any kind of arm over move or any of the moves we see, a kind of a chop move from Madubuike or any of that. We just saw him walking Teller back into the quarterback. It was to me, it was a very dominant performance, and Madubuike I'm sure he knows just how much he owes to Travis Jones, and I hope the Ravens figure it out before it's too late to sign him. Because right now he's the guy they really need to get.
They have to get him back, and I think he's the key. He's the key that unlocks. There's a thing I talked about on the UK Ravens pod a couple of weeks ago when we did the big sort of season preview. That there's a world here where if Mike Green becomes who he's a long way from it right now, but I am starting to see, and we'll probably talk about this a bit more in a second, but it makes sense to talk just a little bit about it now. If he becomes the guy that you're starting to see some green shoots of him becoming, that we've seen over the course of the preseason in the first couple of games, late season, you start to really power up this pass rush, because you cannot afford to not double team Travis Jones. And that is the key to then, you then also got a real issue outside. If you have an issue outside, I don't know what you do. I don't know how you stop the press. And at the moment, it's not, like you say, it's a symphony inside, but it could become a masterpiece across the line if they have an orchestra. That's missed the line there. That's very good. But yeah, like it could become that, and Travis Jones is the key that unlocks all of that. You cannot afford not to double team him. If you don't double team him, it's over. And that was against, he had very little opportunities, but I do remember one or two against Petonio where he did get a one-on-one, and it wasn't pretty.
Yeah, he did two pressures as I scored it, and I thought he had a fabulous game. He continues to deny space in the run game. Really did more of this against Buffalo, where he had a couple of plays against Buffalo where they have an automatic, what I basically call an automatic first down on 2nd and 1, particularly with their tush pushy style. And then he got a stop on 3rd and 1. And I think that the Bills might have said, no problem, we'll run it here because we'll tush push it on 4th down. And then he takes the guy down for a 2-yard loss. Cook, I think. And then they had to punt the ball. I've been so impressed with Travis Jones. And right now, if they're talking about 4 players that they can sign, and maybe they get 2, and go with the 4 is Oweh, Jones, Linderbaum, and Likely. Okay, which of those 4 are the 2 the Ravens absolutely have to have from your perspective?
Jones and Likely are the 2 that I think they have to have.
I am in the same exact boat. I think first of all, you can make the case that Linderbaum's more important right now because of how poorly the interior line has looked so far this year, including him. But the problem is he's not playing that well either. And the tight end position is a big vacancy sign without Isaiah Likely and without Patrick Ricard too. But without Isaiah Likely in particular to generate some offense, they've got nothing out of the tight ends where they had the incredible passer rating throwing to. But those are the 2 I need to get. I think Jones is clearly the most important guy they have because I think they could draft a tight end. I think it's be much more difficult to draft a Travis Jones and get someone who's effective right away. They're very fortunate with how late they got Travis Jones. 76, right? 76?
Yeah, it was within the 3rd or the early 3rd.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm completely with you. I think Linderbaum, you and I differ slightly on Linderbaum. I'm a bit higher on Linderbaum than you, but I think we're in lockstep in terms of the value to the team in general. I think there was an element of which they made a calculation when they drafted Linderbaum. Like, don't forget they drafted Linderbaum with the pick they got for trading away Hollywood Brown.
Yep.
And I think they made a calculation of sort of saying, okay, we will start afresh on a new rookie contract with a really good center, but it's not a guarantee that even if he becomes a very good center that we will re-sign him. We will look to fill that gap when it comes around in a different way.
But it is at the heart of what the problem is. It's too much draft capital to use on a center to use a first round pick, because a lot of the value you get, possibly 15-20% of that value, I'd argue, is in the frictions, is in the 5th-year option, is in the ability that you have to franchise this guy potentially if he's that good. You lose all of that if you draft a center because you can't take advantage of either of those frictions. With what you got, with Hamilton, they have all that available. I mean, sure, he plays safety, but they got all of that is on the table. You could franchise him if you needed to. You already did use the 5th-year option, and you made a distinction between him and Linderbaum. And the other thing is there's a whole world of crapola out there that is basically assuming that PFF is correct and that the run blocking is more important for the pass blocking for centers, and I'm just not buying into it. I've looked at this a million different ways, and I'm telling you, that's not the way it is. The other thing Linderbaum gets away with being very underweighted in terms of negativity is all the penalties he has, and he's had a lot.
The other thing I think with the Ravens is that as much as I could not see a way in which they drafted Linderbaum. Don't forget they drafted Linderbaum while Greg Roman was still offensive coordinator. It did not make sense in that scheme. And they found ways of making him work, and even more so with Monken. But I still don't actually think they're weaponizing his movement abilities in space in the run game as much as they could. And I think there are other teams in the league who will do and will probably value that a lot more than the Ravens do. So it's unlikely that it's unlikely they prioritize him in a free agent situation, but it's if he hits free agency, but it's unlikely that they would be able to, that they would go to as high as some other teams will do, because I think there will be other teams that use him differently to the way the Ravens do and will end up getting more out of him in the running game. So it's a really interesting situation to watch, I think, the Linderbaum one.
I think they probably learned their lesson, though, and it'll be a second or third round pick that they go at center. They may even try and go lower than that. Obviously, that hasn't worked out all the times in the past for the Ravens. They've had both guys who took time to develop into the center spot and guys who didn't work out at all, like Gino Gradkowski, if we go back far enough. But Chris Chester ended up being a very good lineman after a couple of years. He was actually a good lineman for the Ravens. He just couldn't break that incredible interior they had at the time with Grubbs, Yanda, and Burke. He wasn't going to get playing time. Then he goes to Washington. He ends up having a hell of a career.
There is a part of them that may be hoping for a couple of attack. I'm sure they won't be hoping for an injury, but it may be interesting if Linderbaum has a niggle where he loses a couple of weeks and they get to see Corey Bullock, who I thought was really good in the preseason. I think we have to pump the brakes because of the level of competition. But if you could see him in a regular season situation, they can see what they have there, because it does feel like that's a cheaper way to fill the void.
Yeah, completely agree. I think they need to be looking at those options, period. It's one of the reasons I was really upset by the loss of Dellinger during the process. I kind of thought they should have kept a 10th offensive lineman, given Carson Vincent is there. You always have 4 tackles. It makes it less likely that you're going to have the 5 guys you need to play interior on a week-to-week basis. So I didn't like that loss. And then they had to have some inkling that Dellinger was going to move on as soon as he was set free. That they might have thought that they were going to get him back on the practice squad, but they had to have some inkling. And even if they didn't, they should have had that talk with them ahead of time to say, hey, you might get claimed, but if you don't get claimed, we really want you back here, and we want to know you're in our plans, and in particular at center for 2026, you're in our plans. Now, one of the things that would kind of be hard to sell to him is that it wasn't used at center in the preseason. I was hoping he would, but they went with Reed Holsky. Warhop talked about putting Dellinger at the position, and then it never materialized in preseason. I don't remember him having snaps in camp at the position even.
No, they gave him a really good run at it, and I'm a guy who really liked the Dellinger pick. Like people don't know the injuries that he had were crippling in college, but they were random. They were very different each year, and so it wasn't like you could put your finger on something and say that's something that's a recurring issue. It was just really random stuff. But when he did play, I thought he looked good, and he was okay in the preseason. Like, I'm sure it'll be interesting to see what they saw in camp and whether they just didn't see enough from him. But I'm with you. I wasn't a big fan of losing Dellinger in that situation, and I'd have liked to have found a way to have kept him.
Yeah, they also managed to lose both Dellinger and Dalcourt, who would have been either one of them could have been a reasonable backup choice and a possible 2026 center. I would put Dellinger ahead of Dalcourt, obviously, based on, well, maybe not obviously, but based on where they are now. But Penning and Samac, I don't believe either of those guys is gonna take the role in 26. So it really ends up being Bullock or a draft pick, and that's you've limited your options dramatically at that point. All right, I want to talk packages a little bit before we move on. Now, this is a very simplistic package game for the Ravens. They played one jumbo, mentioned it, 6-yard run that converted when they had 3rd and 1. They played 66 snaps of standard nickel. Now, a team might play 12. They might play 11. They could do a fair number of things. They have a big offensive line. Once put in the base defense, I thought, as we mentioned earlier, is one of the big nose thumbings of this game. 4.5 yards a snap there. And for the 4-corner dime was in for 5 snaps. As I mentioned, all 5 defensive wins. Really nice to see that after a tough week 1. A lot of that was Alexander, but it wasn't exclusively Alexander. Other players had trouble too in that week 1 game. And they came back and they played very well with TJ Tampa coming in as a 6th defensive back. They had other guys who basically had to come in. Humphrey had to leave the game and looked like he was exercising his groin on the sideline from what I could tell the way he's twisting around. Did you get a view of that on TV?
Not a great view, but yeah, it did seem like that was something that was going on. It's a worry because he is very important to the structure of this Ravens defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And they don't really have another backup nickel. His versatility is critical to the team. But anyway, that's all they played, just 3 packages the entire game. And so they pretty much said, hey, Browns, here's what we're going to show you. And the Browns could not figure out a way to penetrate it. I'll tell you what, we'll come back and we'll start talking about the pass rush and then individual players in the second part. I don't think there's a ton to go through in the pass rush, but I thought the Ravens did a very interesting job of scheming up rush without using numbers in this game.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it was very interesting.
All right. Well, James, it's always a pleasure talking football with you. You're one of the really great football minds in this community, and I appreciate it every time we have you on. Can you tell folks where they can find your material, maybe on UK Ravens, and also tell maybe your draft guide?
Yeah, so you can find me on X at NFL Ogden. You can also hear me most weeks on the UK Ravens podcast and a big part of the UK Ravens community over here. And then I also every year do a draft guide, which is focused exclusively on the Baltimore Ravens and how each player, you get a bit of an evaluation on each player, coming sort of usually get you through day 1 and day 2 in terms of the bulk in the guide. Gives you an evaluation of the potential players on day 1 and day 2, but also how they fit with the Ravens, and hopefully a nice intro and lots of like thoughtful grading goes into that as well. Also, most of that stuff gets published on Russell Street Report, so you can find me on there too. And that's the kind of main thing I do each year is that draft guide.
It's very detailed. It's a great resource. It's really worth reading, and I'd highly recommend it. And we always have James on this show for one of the positions. It sounds like you're have good knowledge of the quarterbacks this year, so maybe we'll have you on for that. If not something, it'll be something else that the Ravens need. But always appreciate you coming on the show. Other folks out there, thanks for listening. As always, please help the show by liking and subscribing if you're listening to YouTube, and telling that one other person about the show. Always very valuable to us to have word of mouth. With all of the social media there is out there and all the ways to push content to people who basically interact with things, the best possible interaction you could do for us is a word of mouth recommendation of the show. James, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.